6 months had passed since the Battle of Varath's Crossing, and the galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. Una stood before the Galactic Council in the Great Chamber on Varanthos Prime, surrounded by representatives of 100 species who had gathered to hear her testimony about the human war effort. She was no longer the detached academic who had left this world half a year ago. She had seen too much for that. She had changed too much for that. Distinguished members of the council, she began, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. I was sent to observe the human military campaign against the Kethver Dominion. I was expected to document the defeat of a young and reckless species, to write the final chapter of their brief history. She paused, looking around at the assembled representatives. I was wrong, she continued. We were all wrong. The council chamber rustled with whispered conversations. But Una pressed on. In 6 months of war, the humans have fought 27 major engagements against the Kethver. They have lost over 60,000 soldiers, sailors, and support personnel. They have sacrificed ships that took decades to build and technology that represented generations of development. She let the numbers sink in before continuing, and they are winning. The chamber erupted in noise, representatives shouting questions and objections. But Una raised her hand for silence. I know this seems impossible, she said. I know the Kethver outnumber them. I know the mathematics favor the Dominion. But I have learned something important about humans in these 6 months. Something that changes everything. She took a deep breath. Humans do not fight like we do, she explained. When we go to war, we calculate acceptable losses and strategic advantages. We preserve our forces and minimize risk. We fight to survive. Her voice hardened. Humans fight to win. They do not ask what they can afford to lose. They ask what victory requires. And then they pay that price, whatever it costs. Every single time, I watched 3 destroyers sacrifice themselves to save a refugee convoy. I watched pilots fly their damaged fighters into enemy vessels rather than eject to safety. I watched captains stay at their posts until their ships burned around them, refusing to abandon their crews. This is not recklessness, she said firmly. This is something far more dangerous. This is a species that has made peace with death, that has decided there are things worth dying for and refuses to back down when those things are threatened. She pointed toward the tactical displays showing the current state of the war. Look at the map, she commanded. 6 months ago, the Kethver were advancing on 7 fronts. Now they are in retreat on all of them, not because the humans have superior numbers or technology, but because the Kethver have finally met an enemy they cannot break. Every battle costs the humans dearly, but they keep coming. Every defeat only makes them fight harder. Every loss only strengthens their resolve. The Kethver do not know how to fight an enemy like this. They are used to species that surrender when the odds become unfavorable. They are used to beings who value their own lives above all else. Humans do not surrender, Una said, and her voice carried the weight of everything she had witnessed. Humans do not break. Humans do not stop. An elderly counselor, a Methrony whose scales had faded to silver with age, raised a trembling hand. Dr. Seal? She asked. Should we fear them? The humans Una had thought about this question for weeks, turning it over in her mind during sleepless nights filled with memories of fire and sacrifice. Yes, she said finally. Fear them. The chamber went silent, but not because they might turn against us, Una continued. Not because they are violent or aggressive or dangerous. Fear them because they have shown us what we should have been all along. She thought of Commander Jinho, still fighting somewhere on the front lines, still leading his people into battle after battle. She thought of Lieutenant Chai Yunji, who had survived Varath's Crossing and volunteered for 3 more campaigns, and she thought of Captain Yoon and his crew, who had died singing old songs from their homeworld. We have spent millennia building civilizations based on survival, she said. On preservation, on careful calculation of acceptable risk. We have lived for thousands of years and accomplished great things. But somewhere along the way we forgot something important. We forgot that there are things worth dying for. We forgot that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. We forgot that the measure of a civilization is not how long it survives, but what it stands for. The humans have reminded us of these truths, she concluded. And that is why we should fear them, not because of what they might do to us, but because of what they have revealed about ourselves. She stepped back from the podium, and the chamber erupted in debate. Representatives arguing about the implications of her testimony, about what it meant for the compact and for the future of the galaxy. Una did not stay to listen. She walked through the corridors of the building, where she had worked for so many years, past her office and her laboratory and all the comfortable spaces where she had spent decades studying humans from a safe distance. She kept walking until she reached the communication center, where she requested a private channel to the human flagship. Commander Jinho's face appeared on the screen. Older than she remembered, scarred from battles she had not witnessed, but still carrying that same quiet strength that had first confused her all those months ago. Dr. Seal, he said, surprise evident in his voice. I was not expecting to hear from you. I delivered my testimony to the council today, she replied. And I told them the truth, she said. I told them that humanity has changed everything, that the galaxy will never be the same because of what you have done. Jinho nodded slowly. We are not doing this for recognition or glory, he said. We are doing it because it is right. I know, Una smiled. And it was a smile that would have been impossible 6 months ago. That is what makes it so remarkable. She hesitated, then spoke the words she had come to say. I am sorry, she said. For all the years I spent dismissing your species as young and foolish and unworthy of serious consideration. I was blind to what you truly are. And I am ashamed of my blindness. Jinho studied her face through the screen. You are not the same person who came to observe us, he said gently. You have changed. You change me, she admitted. All of you. With your courage and your sacrifice and your refusal to give up even when giving up was the sensible choice. That is not change, Jinho said. That is awakening. The courage was always inside you. We just helped you find it. After the call ended, Una returned to her quarters and sat at her desk, staring at a blank screen. She had come here intending to write an academic paper, a scholarly analysis of human military tactics and their implications for galactic security. But that was not what she wanted to write anymore. She began typing, and the words flowed out of her like water from a broken dam. To the people of Earth and all the human worlds, she wrote. This is a letter of thanks and of apology and of promise. Thank you for showing us what courage looks like. Thank you for fighting when no one else would. Thank you for dying so that strangers might live. I am sorry for the centuries we spent looking down on you, dismissing you as children, ignoring the fire that burned in your hearts. I am sorry for all the times we chose safety over honor, comfort over sacrifice, survival over meaning. And I promise you this. When scholars study this war in centuries to come, they will know the truth. When the galaxy needed heroes, humanity marched to war, and the rest of us finally learned what courage looked like. She sent the letter, not knowing if it would ever reach anyone who mattered, not caring if it did. Some things needed to be said, whether anyone was listening or not. That was something humans had taught her outside her window. The stars burned cold and bright. The same stars that human ships were fighting and dying beneath at this very moment. Una watched them for a long time, thinking about mortality and meaning, and the strange miracle of a species that turned its greatest weakness into its greatest strength. Then she turned back to Her work, there was still so much to learn. There was still so much to become, and for the first time in her very long life, Yuna felt that her remaining years might actually be enough to matter. Yuna spent her first week on Sentinel Station, walking through corridors filled with humans preparing for war. And every day brought new confusion to her carefully ordered understanding of this strange species. She had expected military efficiency, cold and mechanical, the kind of ruthless pragmatism that older species had developed over millennia of conflict. Instead, she found something far more unsettling. In the medical bay, she watched a young surgeon named Dr. Quan Minji spend 3 hours repairing the damaged hand of an engineer who had been injured during ship repairs. The surgery was delicate work, requiring complete concentration, and when it was finished, Minji looked exhausted, but satisfied. "That engineer will be back at work within a week," Yuna observed. "You could have simply replaced the hand with a prosthetic and saved yourself considerable effort." Minji looked at her with an expression that suggested Yuna had said something incomprehensible. "He plays guitar," the surgeon said simply, as if that explained everything. "I do not understand the relevance. His daughter gave him that guitar for his 50th birthday," Minji explained patiently. "He has been learning to play so he can perform at her wedding next year. A prosthetic would work fine for most things, but the sensitivity would not be the same. He might not be able to play properly." Yuna stared at her for a long moment. "We are about to fight a war that your species may not survive," she said carefully. "And you spent 3 hours saving an engineer's ability to play a musical instrument at a wedding that may never happen." Minji smiled, and there was something fierce and gentle in it all at once. "If we give up the things that make life worth living, then we have already lost. We fight so that fathers can play guitar at their daughters' weddings. We fight so that ordinary moments can keep happening. If we forget that, then what exactly are we fighting for?" She walked away to check on her next patient, leaving Yuna to add another note to her growing collection of observations about human behavior that made no logical sense. Commander Beak Jinho found her that evening in the observation deck, where she had been watching the constant flow of ships arriving and departing. "You seem troubled." "Dishal," he said, taking a seat beside her. "I am confused," she admitted. "I have studied your species for 3 decades, and I thought I understood you. But everything I see here contradicts my previous conclusions." "What did you conclude about us?" Yuna hesitated, suddenly aware that her academic assessments might sound harsh when spoken aloud to an actual human. "I concluded that you were a young species, full of potential, but lacking the wisdom that comes with age," she said carefully. "I believed your short lifespans made you reckless and impulsive, unable to think in the long terms that true civilization requires." Jinho nodded slowly, showing no offense at her words. "And now I do not know what to think," she confessed. "I see your people preparing for a war they cannot win. And yet they do not seem reckless or impulsive. They seem deliberate, purposeful, as if they have thought very carefully about what they are doing and chosen to do it anyway." "We have," Jinho said quietly. "Every person here knows exactly what the odds are. We have run the simulations 1,000 times. We know how many ships the Kethver have. We know how many of us will probably die. We know all of it. Then why fight?" Yuna asked. And she realized she genuinely wanted to understand. Why sacrifice so many lives for a cause that seems hopeless? The commander was silent for a long time, watching the stars through the viewport. "Let me tell you something about human history," he said finally. "We nearly destroyed ourselves, not once but many times. We built weapons that could have killed every living thing on our planet. We polluted our air and water until the very act of breathing became dangerous. We fought wars over religion and resources and ideas, killing millions of our own kind. I have studied your history," Yuna said. "It is remarkably violent. Yes, Jinho agreed. And through all of it, we learned something important. We learned what happens when good people do nothing. We learned that evil spreads when no one stands against it. We learned that the cost of inaction is always higher than the cost of fighting. Even when fighting seems hopeless, he turned to face her, and his eyes held a depth of conviction that made her uncomfortable. The Kethver will not stop with 3 refugee species, he continued. They will keep expanding, keep enslaving, keep destroying, because that is what they do. Someone has to draw a line and say no further. Someone has to make them understand that conquest has a price. If not us, then who? If not now. Then when? But you will lose, Yuna said softly. Maybe, Jinho admitted. Probably, but we will make them bleed for every system they take. We will show the galaxy that the Kethver can be hurt, can be stopped, can be defeated if enough people are willing to pay the price, even if we fall. The example we set will inspire others, and someday, the Kethver will face an enemy they cannot beat. You are willing to die for a victory you will never see. Humans have always been willing to die for things bigger than themselves, Jinho said simply. We plant trees whose shade we will never enjoy. We build monuments we will never see completed. We fight for futures we will never live in. That is who we are. That is what makes us human. The next day, Yuna accompanied Jinho to a briefing with the senior commanders of the human fleet. She sat in the back of the room, observing as officers in crisp uniforms discussed strategy and logistics with the same calm professionalism she might expect at an academic conference. They talked about acceptable casualty rates with clinical precision, debating whether losing 30% of their forces in the first engagement would be strategically worthwhile if it allowed them to destroy a key Kethver supply depot. Yuna found herself horrified by the coldness of it, by the way they reduced lives to percentages and probabilities. Then the briefing ended, and she watched those same commanders walk through the ship, stopping to talk with ordinary crew members, asking about their families, remembering names and faces, offering words of encouragement and comfort. Admiral Park Soin, the woman from the broadcast who commanded the entire fleet, spent an hour in the mess hall eating dinner with enlisted personnel, laughing at their jokes and listening to their concerns. How do you do it? Yuna asked Jinho as they watched the Admiral work the room. How do you plan their deaths in one moment and treat them like family in the next? Because both things are true, Jinho replied. We love them and we will send them to die. We will mourn every loss and we will keep fighting. We do not have the luxury of choosing one or the other. We must hold both truths at once. That sounds unbearable. It is, he admitted. But that is the burden of command, and we bear it because someone must. 3 days later, the fleet began its departure. Yuna stood on the observation deck of the flagship, unbroken promise, and watched as hundreds of human vessels formed up in perfect formation, their running lights creating patterns against the darkness of space. She had seen many things in her long life, but she had never seen anything quite like this. The quiet determination of a species marching toward probable destruction because they believed some things were worth dying for. She activated her recording device and spoke her observations aloud. I may have underestimated them, she said carefully. Their resolve is stronger than I expected. Their commitment more profound, but surely not by much. The Kethver remain far superior in numbers and firepower. No amount of determination can overcome basic mathematics. She ended the recording and turned back to the viewport, watching the stars stretch as the fleet entered faster than light travel somewhere ahead of them. The Kethver armada was waiting somewhere ahead of them. Thousands of humans would die, and yet, looking at the faces around her, at the steady hands and clear eyes of people who knew exactly what they were flying toward, Yuna could not help but wonder if perhaps mathematics was not the only force that mattered in war. The Battle of Varath's Crossing would later be remembered as the moment the galaxy learned to fear humanity. But in those terrible hours it felt like nothing more than slaughter. Yuna clung to a support rail on the bridge of the Unbroken, promise as the ship shuddered under another direct hit. Watching displays flicker with damage reports and casualty counts that climbed higher with every passing minute, she had stopped counting the dead somewhere around 5,000. Now the numbers were just abstractions. Too large to comprehend, too awful to accept. Hull breach on decks 7 through 9, an officer reported. His voice tight but controlled. Damage control teams are responding. Enemy dreadnought moving to intercept the refugee convoy. Another called out, if it reaches them, they will not survive. Admiral Park studied the tactical display with eyes that seemed to see through the chaos to something beyond. What ships do we have in intercept range? 3 destroyers. But they are all damaged. The Steadfast Heart has lost half her weapons. The Iron Promise is venting atmosphere from multiple breaches. And the Dawn's Light took a direct hit to her engines. Can they reach the dreadnought before it reaches the convoy? Yes, ma'am. But they cannot defeat it. They do not have the firepower. Park closed her eyes for a moment, and Yuna saw the weight of command settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. Open a channel to those 3 ships. She ordered. The communication link crackled to life, and 3 faces appeared on the screen. 3 captains who knew exactly what was about to be asked of them. This is Admiral Park, she said. A Kethver dreadnought is moving toward the refugee convoy. I need you to intercept it. Captain Yoon of the Steadfast Heart nodded slowly. You are asking us to die. Admiral, I'm asking you to buy time, Park replied. Long enough for the convoy to reach the safety of the main fleet. I will not order you to do this. The choice is yours. The 3 captains looked at each other through their screens, and something passed between them. Some unspoken agreement that Yuna could not quite understand. How much time do you need? Captain Yoon asked. 15 minutes. He laughed. And there was genuine humor in it despite everything. 15 minutes against a dreadnought with 3 half-dead destroyers. He said, should be no problem at all. Yoon, we will do it. Admiral, he interrupted. We all knew this day might come when we signed up. Better to die for something that matters than to live having done nothing at all. The other 2 captains voiced their agreement, and Park's composure finally cracked, just for a moment. Just long enough for Yuna to see the tears she was fighting back. The compact will remember your names, the Admiral said, her voice rough with emotion. Make sure they remember why we fought. Captain Yoon replied, that is all we ask. The channel closed, and Yuna watched on the tactical display as 3 damaged destroyers broke formation and accelerated toward the massive Kethver dreadnought. It was suicide. Pure and simple. Everyone on the bridge knew it, and yet those 3 ships flew straight and true, their engines burning bright against the darkness. The dreadnought turned to meet them, its weapons lighting up with deadly intent. The first destroyer to die was the Iron Promise. She took a direct hit to her reactor core and vanished in a flash of light that seemed to burn itself in 2. Yuna's eyes, 243 lives. Gone in an instant, but the other 2 ships kept coming. The Dawns Light managed to close to weapons range and unleashed everything she had. Her damaged weapons system screaming with the effort. She scored hits on the dreadnought shields. Not enough to penetrate, but enough to force the massive ship to focus on her. That gave the Steadfast Heart the opening she needed. Captain Yoon drove his crippled destroyer directly into the dreadnought's path, presenting himself as a target too close to ignore. The dreadnought's weapons tore into the Steadfast Heart, ripping her apart piece by piece. But Yoon refused to die quickly. He kept his ship moving, kept drawing fire. kept buying precious seconds while the dawn's light continued her assault. The communications officer intercepted the Steadfast Heart's final transmission, and Captain Yoon's voice filled the bridge. "Tell my daughter I love her," he said, calm as if he were ordering dinner. "And tell the Kethver they can go straight to hell." Then the Steadfast Heart exploded, and Captain Yoon was gone. But he had bought those 15 minutes. The refugee convoy reached the safety of the main fleet, and 20,000 civilians lived because 3 captains chose to die. Yuna found herself weeping, tears streaming down her face in a way she had not experienced in centuries. She wept for the dead, yes, but she also wept because she finally understood. This was what humans were. This was what they had always been, species that would die for strangers, that would sacrifice everything for people they had never met, that would face impossible odds, not because they thought they could win, but because they believed some things were worth losing for. The battle raged on for another 6 hours. Yuna watched it all, unable to look away, bearing witness to acts of heroism and horror that would haunt her for the rest of a long life. She saw human ships form walls between enemy fire and wounded allies. She saw pilots eject from damaged fighters and turn their doomed craft into guided missiles aimed at enemy vessels. She saw crews fighting to save their ships until the very last moment, refusing to abandon their posts even when survival became impossible. And through it all, she heard the communications traffic, the voices of humans facing death. Some prayed, calling out to gods she did not recognize. Some sang old songs from their homeworlds that seemed to give them courage. Some simply spoke to each other, sharing jokes and memories and words of encouragement as the darkness closed in. "Hold the line," a captain shouted as her ship took hit after hit for the compact. Another responded, "For those who cannot fight for themselves." A third added, "For tomorrow." A young voice cut through the chaos. "For all the tomorrows we are giving them." The Kethver sent a broadcast demanding surrender, promising to hunt down every human world if they did not submit. Admiral Park's response was to order an intensified attack. There was no negotiation, no consideration, no hesitation, just silent defiance followed by fire and fury. When the battle finally ended, the humans had lost nearly half their fleet. Thousands were dead, thousands more wounded. Ships that had taken years to build reduced to scattered debris floating in the void. But the Kethver had lost more. Their dreadnought was destroyed, along with dozens of their cruisers and hundreds of smaller vessels. The refugee convoy was safe, and for the first time in their history, the Kethver had been made to pay a price for their aggression that actually hurt. Yuna stood on the bridge as the surviving crew began the grim work of recovery, searching for escape pods and survivors among the wreckage. Commander Jinho appeared beside her, his uniform singed and his face cut where debris had struck him. "You are injured," she said, reaching toward his face without thinking. "It is nothing," he replied, gently pushing her hand away. "There are others who need attention more than I do." "How can you be so calm?" Yuna asked, her voice breaking. "After everything we just witnessed, how are you still standing?" Jinho looked at her with tired eyes that held depths of sorrow she could barely comprehend. "Because the war is not over," he said simply. "Because there are more battles to fight and more people to protect. I will grieve when we have won, or I will grieve not at all because I will be dead. But I will not stop. I cannot stop. None of us can." "What are you?" Yuna whispered. And it was not a question she had ever thought to ask about any species. Jinho smiled. And it was a smile that contained everything she had witnessed in the last 6 hours. The courage and the sacrifice and the terrible beauty of people who refused to surrender, even when surrender was the logical choice. "We are human," he said. "This is what we have always been. This is what we will always be. And I would not have it any other way. The fleet began its slow journey toward the next battle. And Yuna finally understood what the galaxy should have seen all along. Humans were not to be pitied for their short lives. They were to be feared for what those short lives made them willing to do. The journey to the front lines took 11 days. And Yuna spent every waking hour trying to understand the humans around her. She had given up on her academic detachment somewhere around day 3. When she found a young soldier named Lieutenant Chai Yunji sitting alone in the ship's memorial garden, writing letters on actual paper with an actual pen. "What are you doing?" Yuna asked. Sitting down beside her, without waiting for an invitation, Yunji looked up with startled eyes, then relaxed when she recognized the Velthari scholar. "Writing to my family," she said, "and to my friends, and to my little brother. Just in case I do not come back." "You have electronic communication systems," Yuna pointed out. "You could record video messages." "I know," Yunji smiled sadly. "But there is something different about handwriting. My mother used to write me notes when I was a child. Little messages she would put in my lunchbox. I still have all of them. When I hold them, I can feel that she touched the same paper. It is more real somehow." She returned to her writing, her pen moving steadily across the page. "Are you afraid?" Yuna asked quietly. Yunji's hand paused for just a moment before continuing. "Yes," she admitted. "I am terrified. I think about dying every single day. I think about never seeing my mother again or watching my brother graduate from university or falling in love and getting married and having children. I think about all the years I will never have." "Then, why are you here?" The young lieutenant looked up, and Yuna saw something ancient in her young eyes. "Because I think about the Kethver doing to others what they did to the Varth," she said. "I saw the recordings from their conquered worlds. The labor camps where people work until they die. The breeding facilities where they force slaves to produce more slaves. The execution grounds where they kill anyone who resists." Her voice hardened. "I think about children being taken from their parents, about families being torn apart, about entire species being ground down into nothing because no one was willing to stand up and say no. And when I think about that, my fear seems very small, very selfish." "It is not selfish to want to live," Yuna said gently. "No," Yunji agreed. "But it is selfish to let others die so that I can live safely. I would rather be afraid and fighting than comfortable and complicit." She finished her letter, folded it carefully, and placed it in an envelope with her mother's name written on the front. "The ship's chaplain will make sure these are delivered if I do not survive," she said. "It helps, knowing that my words will reach them even if I cannot." Yuna watched her walk away and felt something shift in her chest. Some wall she had built between herself and these strange, brave, terrifying people. That evening, she sought out Commander Jinho in the officers' mess and asked the question that had been burning in her mind for days. "Why do you do it?" she said. "Not just fight. I understand fighting. But why do you give so much of yourselves? Why do you love so deeply when you know how easily that love can be taken away?" Jinho set down his food and considered the question carefully. "When I was a child," he said, "my grandmother told me a story about a man who planted a tree. He was very old, and he knew he would not live to see the tree grow tall. His neighbor laughed at him and asked why he was wasting his time. And the old man said that he was not planting the tree for himself. I do not understand. He planted it for the children who would one day climb its branches." Jinho continued. "For the lovers who would sit in its shade. For the birds who would nest in its leaves. He knew he would never see any of those things. But the knowing made him happy because he could imagine them, because he had given something to the future." He looked at Yuna with eyes that held both sorrow and joy. "That is why we love so deeply," he said. "That is why we give so much of ourselves, because we know our time is short, and we want to leave something behind, something that matters. Something that says we were here and our lives meant something. But the pain, Yuna protested. When you lose someone you love, the pain is unbearable. Yes, Jinho agreed. It is. I have lost people I loved. My mother died when I was 17. My best friend was killed in a training accident 5 years ago. The pain was like fire. Like my heart was being torn from my chest. And yet you keep loving. Because the alternative is worse, he said simply. I could close myself off, protect myself from the pain. But then I would never feel the joy either. I would exist, but I would not live. And what is the point of surviving if you are not truly alive? Yuna thought about her own long life. The centuries she had spent in careful emotional distance. Observing and analyzing, but never truly connecting. She had always believed it was wisdom. The natural result of experience. But now she wondered if it was simply cowardice. The ship's alarms blared suddenly, cutting through her thoughts. All hands to battle stations. The announcement echoed through the corridors. We are approaching the Vara system. Repeat. All hands to battle stations. Yuna followed Jinho to the bridge, where the main view screen showed the tactical situation in cold, clear graphics. The Kethver fleet was waiting for them. Just as expected, but there were more ships than anyone had predicted. 3 times our number, Admiral Park said calmly. Studying the display, they must have pulled vessels from their border defenses. Admiral, should we retreat and regroup? One of her officers asked. Park was silent for a long moment, and Yuna could see her weighing the options, calculating the lives that hung in the balance. No, she said finally. If we retreat, they will push forward and hit the refugee colonies before we can organize a second defense. We fight here. We will take severe casualties. I know, the Admiral's voice was steady. Send a message to all ships. Tell them the odds. Give anyone who wants to withdraw permission to do so. No one will be forced to fight this battle. The message went out, and Yuna watched the responses come back. Not a single ship withdrew. Very well, Admiral Park said, and there was something like pride in her voice. All ships, form up on the flagship. We will show these slavers what humans are made of. The fleet moved into formation, and Yuna stood on the bridge of the unbroken promise. Watching humans prepare to die, she saw fear on their faces, yes. But she also saw something else. She saw resolve. She saw purpose. She saw people who had looked at death and decided it was not the worst thing in the universe. Dr. Seal, Jinho said quietly beside her. You should move to the protected observation area. It will be safer there when the fighting starts. Yuna shook her head. I will stay here, she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. I came to observe, and I intend to observe everything. Jinho studied her for a moment, then nodded. Stay close to me, he said, and if things go badly, I will make sure you get to an escape pod. What about you? He smiled, and it was the saddest, bravest smile she had ever seen. Someone has to stay and fight, he said. That is what we do. The two fleets closed the distance between them, and Yuna found herself holding her breath as the universe seemed to pause. Then the first shots were fired, and hell opened its gates. She had never experienced anything like it. The chaos and terror and thunder of full-scale space combat ships exploded around her, each one carrying hundreds of lives that were there one moment and gone the next. The bridge shook with impact after impact as Kethver weapons found their mark. Officers shouted orders. Damage reports flooded in, and through it all, Admiral Park stood like a statue of calm in the center of the storm. Maintain formation, she commanded. Protect the civilian transports at all costs. Yuna watched in horror and awe as human ships threw themselves between enemy fire and the refugee vessels. Taking hits meant for others, dying so that strangers might live. It was madness. It was magnificent. It was everything she had ever failed to understand about humanity, written in fire and blood across the darkness of space. Yuna had spent 30 years studying humans from the comfort of her office at the Galactic Institute of Xenanthropology. And in all that time, she had never found a reason to take them seriously. She sat now in her private study on Varantos Prime, surrounded by holographic displays showing human cultural artifacts, biological data, and historical records that she had collected over 3 decades of academic work. The Velthari people lived for nearly 1,000 years, and Yuna had used her centuries well, becoming one of the most respected scholars in her field. But humans had always been something of a puzzle to her, a curiosity rather than a subject worthy of deep concern. They lived such brief lives, barely a century if they were lucky. And yet they built cities and wrote books and fell in love as if any of it would last forever. She found it almost charming, in a sad sort of way, her latest paper, titled The Paradox of Human Ambition, had been well received by her colleagues at the Institute, all of whom shared her gentle dismissal of humanity as a species that tried too hard and achieved too little. They were newcomers to the galactic stage, having joined the Galactic Compact only 40 years ago, and most older species viewed them as children playing at being adults. Yuna had written extensively about their strange contradictions, how they possessed fragile bodies yet chose to live on dangerous worlds, how they feared death yet rushed toward it with reckless abandon, how they claimed to value peace yet spent most of their history making war against themselves. Fascinating creatures, she had concluded, but ultimately unremarkable in the grand scheme of galactic civilization. The door to her study opened and her assistant, a young Velthari named Timon, entered with a worried expression on his elegant face. "Dr. Seal, the Council has issued an emergency broadcast," he said, his voice carrying the musical quality common to their species. Yuna waved her hand and the holographic displays shifted to show the face of High Counselor Merith, an ancient Velthari whose silver skin had faded to near white with age. "Citizens of the Compact," Merith began, "it is my solemn duty to inform you that the Kethver Dominion has declared war upon our alliance." Yuna felt her hearts quicken, both of them beating faster in her chest. The Kethver were a brutal species, expansionist and cruel, known throughout the galaxy for their practice of enslaving conquered peoples. They had demanded that the Compact surrender 3 refugee species who had fled Kethver space. And when the Compact refused, war became inevitable. Most member species are currently debating the appropriate response, Marith continued. Ranging from negotiated settlement to strategic withdrawal, however. I must inform you that one member species has already declared their intention to fight. The image shifted to show a human, a female with dark hair and steady eyes, wearing the uniform of their military forces. "I am Admiral Park Soyan of the United Human Fleet," the woman said. And Yuna noticed that her voice carried no trace of fear. "The Kethver have threatened free peoples with slavery and death. And humanity will not stand by while innocents suffer. We will fight. And we will not stop fighting until every last refugee is safe and every Kethver soldier understands that the Compact will not bow to tyranny." The broadcast ended and Yuna sat in silence for a long moment. "How tragic," she finally said. And she meant it sincerely. Humans had such a small fleet, perhaps 300 combat vessels at most, and their territory consisted of only a dozen worlds on the outer edge of compact space. The Kethver commanded thousands of ships and had conquered dozens of species over the millennia. "They cannot possibly win," Timon said, echoing her thoughts. "Exactly, no," Yuna agreed. "They cannot, but I suspect they will try anyway. It is very human of them." She turned back to her work, already composing the outline of a new paper in her mind. Something about the futility of human heroism and the tragic waste of lives that would soon follow 3 days later. A message arrived that changed everything. The Institute had received an official request from the Human Defense Ministry, asking for a neutral academic observer to embed with their forces and document the coming conflict. The Council had approved the request, viewing it as an excellent opportunity to record what they assumed would be a brief and one-sided. War Yuna's name had been put forward as the ideal candidate. "They want me to watch them die," she said to Taman as she read the message. "The Institute believes it will be valuable for future scholarship," her assistant replied. Carefully, Yuna considered refusing, but something stopped her. Perhaps it was simple academic curiosity, or perhaps some deeper instinct she could not name. Humans had always puzzled her, and this might be her last chance to understand them before their species was reduced to a footnote in galactic history. "Tell them I accept," she said. The journey to human space took 2 weeks, and Yuna spent most of that time reviewing everything she knew about human military history. What she found disturbed her more than she expected. Humans had been making war since before they discovered fire, fighting each other over territory and resources and ideas for thousands of years before they ever reached the stars. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet, and they had come terrifyingly close to using them on more than one occasion. Yet somehow they had survived, crawling back from the edge of extinction again and again through sheer stubborn refusal to give up. She read accounts of human battles that seemed almost mythological in their scale and brutality. Conflicts where millions died and cities burned and entire civilizations collapsed, only to rise again from the ashes. She studied their generals and their warriors, their heroes and their monsters, and she began to wonder if perhaps she had been too quick to dismiss them. But no, she told herself firmly. History was one thing, and reality was another. The humans had fought among themselves for millennia, but they had never faced an enemy like the Kethver, a species that had been conquering worlds since before humans learned to walk upright. This war would be different, and it would end the way all such wars ended, with the weaker species broken and scattered when her ship finally arrived at Sentinel Station, the massive human military construct that would serve as the staging ground for the war. Yuna expected to find chaos and despair. She expected weeping families and frightened soldiers and the general air of doom that accompanies any hopeless cause. What she found instead made her pause at the viewport and stare in confusion. Ships were arriving from every human world, not just military vessels, but transport craft packed with volunteers, engineers offering their skills, doctors prepared to treat the wounded, ordinary citizens who had left their homes and their jobs to join the fight. There was no despair here, no chaos, no sense of inevitable defeat. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like determination, like purpose, like a species that had decided exactly what it was willing to die for and had made peace with that decision. A human officer approached her, a man with a kind face and serious eyes who introduced himself as Commander Baek Jinho. "Dr. Seal," he said, bowing in the formal style of his culture, "welcome to Sentinel Station. I will be your liaison during your time with our forces." "Thank you, Commander," Yuna replied, still watching the endless stream of arriving ships through the viewport. "I must admit, I expected a different atmosphere here." Jinho followed her gaze and smiled, though there was something sad in his expression. "You expected us to be afraid," he said. "And it was not a question. I expected you to be realistic," Yuna corrected gently. "The Kethver outnumber you significantly, and your technology is not superior to theirs. The odds of victory are extremely low." The commander turned to face her, and something in his eyes made Yuna's breath catch in her throat. "We know the odds, Dr. Seal," he said quietly. "We have always known. But some things are worth fighting for, even when you cannot win. Especially when you cannot win." because that is when it matters most. He walked away to attend to his duties, leaving Yuna alone with her thoughts and her growing sense that she had fundamentally misunderstood something very important about the species she had studied for 30 years.